A single mom of two gets home after a long day of work with her $50 paycheck in hand and $20 in tips for the day. She is then expected to put a roof over her family's head and food on the table. How do we expect her to do this when sub-minimum wages exist? She isn't getting what she's working for. At the end of a long day and the best service she could provide for her customers, her salary still doesn't average out to the salary of an employee who is receiving at least minimum wage in their state. Some days are great and some days are bad. But why should employees base their salary on the gratitude of the customer and how generous they are feeling that day? No one should have a salary that is so flexible that they have to worry about what they'll be making next week in comparison to this week. I would like to refute the New York Times "It is time to end sub-minimum wages" editorial by refuting a specific subclaim. While I agree with the claim that we should reject the idea of a two-tiered sub-minimum wage to an extent, I take specific issue with the editorial's claim because they did not go far enough with this idea of a two-tiered sub-minimum wage and how it could actually benefit tipped employees. Sub-minimums aren't justified, and the overall income of tipped workers doesn't even out to the minimum wage of non-tipped workers by the amount of tips that are received. While refuting the subclaim of rejecting a two-tiered sub-minimum wage, we will also be discussing secure paychecks for sub-minimum employees and the people affected by sub-minimums. I will be refuting the idea that the acting labor commissioner should reject the idea of a two-tiered sub-minimum wage. Although I agree that we should ultimately extend the full state minimum wage to tipped workers, we have to take it one step at a time. Ultimately, our goal is to be rid of sub-minimums. And if we move towards our goal of increasing the sub-minimums in some states, it could help to reach our long-term goal. Settling now is not an option anymore. If we act today, there will be change tomorrow. There are several arguments against raising the sub-minimum wage because it is believed to harm the restaurants industry and its employment opportunities. But the impact of raising sub-minimums is a positive one. According to an article in Labor Press, the Restaurant Opportunity Center, an organization that is big on advocating for tipped workers, is confident that the Labor Commissioner took a concrete step to improve working conditions, while also leaving the door open for the eventual establishment of one fair wage for all. The editorial also claims that a higher tipped wage, as well as studies on whether to eliminate it entirely sometime in the future, is an unnecessary delay. The editorial did not talk about how the studies in temporarily raising sub-minimum wages could benefit tipped employees in the future. If we continue to challenge the process when it comes to sub-minimums, we will see the results that we want to see sooner than later. According to an article by Hoffer, a proposed law would gradually eliminate the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. In Massachusetts, a new bill would instead give a gradual increase to tipped workers past 2017, with the two-tier system being abolished in 2022. If we believe that most studies were unnecessary delays, then we wouldn't have things to support the change. For now, we see that change is positive when it comes to sub-minimum wages. When they first began raising sub-minimum wages, it was because they saw positive outcomes with surrounding states. My third critique is that the editorial did not touch on the subject of how pleased some tipped workers were with the increase in the tipped wage, which could in turn still provide some support for the two-tiered sub-minimum wage system. Overall, the idea of supporting equality for tipped workers needs to explore the more central ideas of why they deserve equal pay. We can say we supported all we would like, but evidence that is not beneficial to why we should raise wages is of no help. Another article by Kevin Solari titled "Good News for New York's Tipped Workers" explains that the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers was increased by 50% to $7.50 an hour. This is a dramatic change in salary that the New York Times editorial did not emphasize. When taking into account the hours worked, the different dynamics of any work area, and how much salary can fluctuate between differentiating factors, then we give the public something to consider. The editorial is putting down the idea of a two-tiered system, but is not addressing what good the wage board is doing for tipped workers now. There are many factors that come into play when considering tipped wages. But now it's time for our world to come to a realization that tipped workers deserve a steady pay, just as much as anyone else does for the work they do. But at the same time, they should also realize that there are vital steps to be taken when preparing to eliminate sub-minimum wages as a whole, and this is one of them. When coming up with solutions for the issue of sub-minimums, we must consider the overall income of tipped workers, and that it doesn't even out to the minimum wage of non-tipped workers, but the amount of tips that are received. The real solution for now is to take as much change as we can get and work from there. There is no unnecessary change or delay to plans that can help us be rid of sub-minimums in the future. The time for justice and equality for tipped workers is now. Thank you.